hope everyone's doing well, and we have arrived. We have arrived at the one. We have arrived smack dab at the Tootsie Roll center of the Tootsie Pop that is the Police Academy cinematic universe. This is the one, and I talked a little bit about this in part 3, that I felt like part 3 had finally figured a lot of this stuff out and finally had, landed in a very comfortable place. But part 4 is where it all comes together. All the puzzle pieces seem like they have fallen into place, and this is, I think, quintessentially what people think of when they think of a Police Academy movie. When you ask people of my generation or whatever, think of a Police Academy movie, I think this is the film that kind of comes to mind, whether they know it or not. It just feels like for this one, everything has finally aligned. After a lot of picking and choosing, a lot of hemming and hawing, it seems like we have a cast and a group of characters that finally all balance each other out, that are all going in the same direction. Everybody knows their part, everybody knows their role, and everything is just blending so well. And the humor has finally kind of settled to where it's found its balance. And there are a number of reasons for that, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I do think that this is the one that most people just think of when they think of a Police Academy movie. And again, there are a number of factors. I think familiarity is one of them. As I mentioned, if most people probably came to these films a lot like I did, and that is as a kid seeing them in constant reruns back in the day. And this one and number 3 are the ones that were rerun the most, and I think there's a reason for that. Again, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So I think just the familiarity, and I think also the fact that just by the structure of these films, the fact that they can tend to run together, that it's hard to pick out what specific gags happen in one film versus happen in another. I think that kind of lends it to, like I mentioned, I totally forgot that Harris wasn't in Police Academy 3. I thought he was. And I don't think I'm the only one to kind of make that mistake, or ones like it. I also think that this is the cast that has kind of been immortalized and held up as the gold standard. This lineup is the one that says this is your Police Academy cast. When they went and made the Marvel, I believe it was Marvel who published the comic series, this is the group of actors and characters that they used. When they did the animated series, yes, for those who missed that, yes, there was a Police Academy animated series, which is a nice way of saying cartoon in the 80s. We didn't really have animated series until Batman in the 90s. But anyway, this is the cast of characters and the dynamics that they used. They modeled it after this film because it was going into production around the time this film was coming out. So when they did the toy line, yes, there was a Police Academy toy line. This is the group of characters that were the basis for it. So I think this is the one that most people think of when we're asked to think of Police Academy and the characters from it. But here's the funny part. While all that is true and all that is relevant, the simple fact is we only got this cast and this dynamic and this formula for one movie. One time. The opposite end of the coin of them finally kind of falling into a groove and finally, knowing exactly what they're doing after 4 pictures is that we're 4 pictures deep. They've been doing these for 4 years, and some actors have grown past them and are ready to move on. So while we are going to celebrate one of the best entries into the series, we are also at the end going to say goodbye to quite a few memorable characters. So for what would seem to be just another sequel, this one proves to be a very, very pivotal point in its own series. So join me now as we take a look at Police Academy 4: Citizens on Patrol.
I love the 80s. I love the 80s.
Okay, so before we move forward and talk about Police Academy 4, I want to back up just slightly and look backwards at Police Academy 3 and 2, because I realized that I did not kind of pay homage to an actor who really deserves to have his career and his personality looked at, and who brought a lot to the series, even though I spent a lot of time kind of talking about how his character didn't work or wasn't as good as his predecessor. So I want to rectify that and spend a few minutes and talk about Mr. Art Materno, who played Lieutenant and then Captain Mauser in Police Academy 2 and 3. Again, I know I gave him a lot of flack and, spent a lot of time comparing him to Harris, but I think at the same time it has to be said that that's not an easy job. It is not an easy thing to come in and replace a well-known character, someone who did the job really well, and always drawing comparisons. And I feel for what he had to work with and what was there, I think he did a good job. I badmouth the character a lot, but he had some genuinely funny moments. And I think the actor is really trying. You compare this to like Lassard's brother in number 2, who looks like he's constantly eyeing the exit. Art Materno was there for it, and he was giving it everything he had. And I think that deserves some respect. So I just want to take a little bit and talk about this man, because he had a fascinating life and some pretty interesting points in his career. So getting started in the 70s, he would frequently appear on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show and other variety shows as a magician called the Great Materno. The joke being that he was a magician who did like the most basic tricks, but made a big spectacle of them. His big joke was, doing the whole, finger slide thing. I don't know if kids today know about that as much as, kids of my generation. Everybody had an uncle or a father who could do the, grab their thumb and make it look like they're sliding it down their hand kind of thing. But he would do that while constantly humming an inane song called Fine and Dandy. That was his whole spiel. Funny enough, and this is what really caught my attention, and I think this is really fascinating, in 2007, he actually sued Seth MacFarlane and Family Guy because in one of their cutaway gags, they had Jesus doing Art Materno's magic act, like for verbatim. So he sued them for that, and they settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. But I thought that was kind of hysterical to me, for a lot of different reasons. Also interesting, so you might wonder why he did not return for a couple of these. Well, I don't know if this is exactly the reason, but it would fit in because in 1989, September of 1989, he broke his neck and seriously injured his spinal cord falling off of a ladder while he was working on his house, and he was initially a quadriplegic. And through a lot of work, he would eventually regain the use of his arms and his legs, and he was able to move around in kind of short bursts with the help of crutches, but he was mostly confined to a wheelchair. So after that, his on-screen appearances kind of dwindled, as you would assume they would. He was busy doing rehabilitation. But he would make guest appearances and small roles. What I found really interesting is that between 1993 and 2001, he would infrequently tour with a one-man show entitled, and this is like one of the best titles for a stand-up show, entitled "Jews Don't Belong on Ladders, an Accidental Comedy." And he would raise money in order to support a project that helped support people with spinal cords and spinal cord injuries, not spinal cords, but the sufferers of spinal cord injuries. Helps them buy wheelchairs and crutches and other supplies. So that's just really cool. I'm always really fascinated when people turn kind of tragedy into something positive and do something good with it. You know, it's very easy when you're down and out to kind of just want to put your shell up and kind of just wither, but it takes a lot for someone to kind of say, nope, I'm going to do something positive with this. So big ups to him. He passed away in 2021, I believe, but fairly recently. But from all accounts, just a very talented performer, a really funny guy, and a good-hearted guy. So I wanted to take a minute before we talk about this movie to backtrack and pay some respect to Mr. Art Matero. Sir, we salute you.
Gnarly.
Let's now talk about Police Academy for Citizens on Patrol. So let's start out as we always do. What is the connecting tissue or the plot of this one? The general coming together is Commandant Lassard wants to start a new community outreach program called Citizens on Patrol, or COP. And what he basically wants is to train volunteer citizens at the police academy, train them in police procedure so that they have a better understanding of what the police do, and they have training to help form a more sophisticated neighborhood watch, basically. Now, it's kind of an interesting idea when you think about it. Like, I wonder how something like this would play out today. You know, would it play out today? Would you be able to do it today? But not everyone is over the moon about this. Well, hang on. Before I get to that, let's talk about our returning cast. So in order to pull this off, Lassard gathers together his favorite graduating class, all of our favorites from the past several movies. So back again are Mahoney, Jones, Hightower, Hooks, Tackleberry, Sweetcheck, Zed, Callahan. I think that's all of them. I don't think I missed anybody. Did I say Zed? I think I said Zed. So our core group are back together. But now, here we go, not everyone is happy about this. One person in particular thinks that the Citizens on Patrol program is a complete joke and should not be going through, and makes his voice very heard. And becomes even more of a conflict when Lassard goes over to an international commandant's convention And this person is left in charge of the academy and the COP program. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, he's back. It's the one, the only, now Captain Harris, played by G.W. Bailey. He is back. And what a welcome, a reintroduction to the series he is. I've sang his praises a lot. But the more I've watched these with a more critical eye, I have to reassert something I said early on in these reviews, and that is I think that Harris was the key to these films' success. That straight man, that antagonist, the bully, this is a very hard role to walk. It is a very difficult thing to do. But there is just something in Harris's character, in the way G.W. Bailey plays him, that checks all the boxes, and he is the perfect foil. He is the perfect victim. He is just all of those things, and always with the air of dignity.
Free comedy tip, Slick. The pie gag's only funny when the saps got dignity.
Because again, I think that's something that Mauser didn't have, is he didn't have the dignity that Harris has. And I think even the filmmakers know it, because Harris has this wonderful little theme that plays whenever he has just been the victim of a prank, and he's trying to address somebody and still maintain his position.
From this moment on, anyone who misplaces their canister of mace will be reprimanded and fined. Is that clear?
Yes, sir!
It's this brilliant little mocking theme. And I think that it is what's been very sorely missing from these films. But even more so, more than him, we finally get the comedy pairing that really puts this over the top. We've had both of these elements individually, but this is the first time we've had them together. And so it is finally great to see Harris and Proctor as a proper comedy team. And boy, G.W. Bailey and Lance Kinsley just get it. They just get the assignment. They just gel so perfectly together. The straight man comedian, the bully slash innocent, the villain slash toady, they have it all. And when they are on the screen together, whenever Harris and Proctor are on screen together, it's phenomenal. I could watch I guess I couldn't, but I would love a whole movie of just Harris and Proctor. I would have loved that, just the two of them. But I understand they only work in doses. Like, I don't think they'd be able to maintain an entire film together. But man, when Harris and Proctor are working together, it's comedy. It's really, really well done. These guys just gelled. Like, I don't know how to say it. And I think the best example of that, the best proof of that, is how effortless it looks. They make it look easy. They make having chemistry and comic timing and the balancing of personalities, they make it look so simple. And that is the calling card of great comedians or great actors, is just making it look effortless. And they really do that. So I am very happy to have G.W. Bailey back as Harris.
Red.
So while we're here, before we move on, let's take a little side trick and talk a little bit about G.W. Bailey, another incredibly fascinating person with a very distinguished career. So Harris, of course, is his most famous creation, but he's had a lot of different characters on a lot of different TV shows. Prior to the Police Academy films, most people probably knew him better as Staff Sergeant Luther Rizzo on MASH, which is, I remember the first time I saw him on MASH, I was like, Captain Harris! You know? He would also, more recently, within the last decade or so, he would play Detective Louis Brazada on TNT's crime drama The Closer and its spin-off series Major Crimes. But he was a staple of 80s movies, usually playing the, typical hard-ass character. Movies like Mannequin and another film that we plan on covering on this series, Short Circuit. This guy just has a fascinating life, so I just want to hit some high points here. So he was born in Port Arthur, Texas, and he went to Thomas Jefferson High School. Two of his classmates were Janis Joplin and Jimmy Johnson, so two double J's. That's kind of interesting. But quite the interesting roster of students that school had. I found this also very interesting, is that he started college at Lamar University, later transferred to Texas Tech, but he left college in the mid-60s to start working at local theater companies and eventually moving to California in the 70s to pursue acting. What I find so cool is that he actually returned to college in 1993 and graduated from Southwest Texas State University, which is now Texas State, with a Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Theater. And from 1999 to 2000, he was their artist in residence. I just find that so cool. Kind of like I was talking about with Art Matano and how you can take a tragedy or a bad situation and choose to do something good with it. This is someone who, left school but went back at a fairly advanced age and completed and got his degree and then became an actor in residence. That's a really cool story. Kind of one of those things of it's never too late to do the things that you want to do or be the person you want to be. I like that. I also like this, kind of going along that same thing. Art Matano. I was talking about Art Matano. From 2001 to 2019, he served as the executive director of the Sunshine Kids Foundation, which provides trips and activities for hundreds of young children who are diagnosed with cancer. And he first volunteered for that organization after his goddaughter was diagnosed with leukemia. So another person who took a tragedy and found a way to make good out of it and to do some good in the world, even when faced with something really horrible and really difficult. So just a really, really fascinating actor in person.
Totally.
So G.W. Bailey and Harris are not the only returning stars this time. I kind of listed out the main Police Academy roster. We also have Copeland is back in a very brief role, which watching these out of order, I didn't realize that was the same guy from all the way back in Police Academy 1 and Police Academy 3. But yeah, so Copeland is here. But once again, as is kind of tradition with a lot of these films, we have a new assortment of trainees and new characters coming in for the Citizens on Patrol program. So let's talk about some of these, because there are going to be some pretty famous faces, believe it or not. So first, let's start with the most forgettable. I'm sorry to say that. It's very mean to say, but it's the truth. So Derek McGarth as a gentleman called Butterworth. I know nothing about this character. I watched this movie twice in preparation for these reviews, And he shows up at the end, and you see him in lineups, but he doesn't really do anything. I do believe, again, doing some research, I think he had more scenes prior to this, but I think a lot of them ended up on the cutting room floor. So he's there, and he gets a special title card in the, the end credits, but he doesn't really do much, I'm sorry to say. So yeah. Our main focus for the citizens on patrol, for the volunteers, is a very well-known character actor of the time, a woman by the name of Billy Bird as Mrs. Feldman, who is this older woman who is just gung-ho about wanting to be a cop and wanting to do more. She's kind of, if you could picture Tackleberry having a grandma, this is who she would be. And indeed, one of the most charming aspects of this film is Mrs. Feldman's relationship with Tackleberry. That she and him just have a bond of, they like the same things, they have the same kind of tastes, and there is just a very sweet mother-son, grandmother-grandson kind of relationship between the two of them, in the way he reacts to her and the way she reacts to him. One of the funniest moments in the film is when they're doing target practice, and she convinces Tackleberry to let him use her gun, let her use his gun, and the damn thing has such a kick it shoots her backwards. But yeah, and she's a charming character. She'll come back again in Police Academy 6 for a cameo. But she's kind of the face of the Citizens on Patrol program. Another character who is going to be around for another movie is a gentleman by the name of Tad Thacker, who plays a guy called House, who's apparently, he knew Hightower when House was a kid, said Hightower used to bounce him on his knee, and the joke is that House is really fat. He is the fat joke. I'm not trying to be cruel or dismissive or body shame. It's the 80s, folks. That was the only kind of comedy type that was still missing from this ragtag commedia troupe, was the fat guy. Well, now you've got him. And that's kind of House's whole deal, is that he's a big guy. And a lot of his humor involves, unfortunately for Sweetcheck, involves him of just Sweetcheck sitting on a bench and House sits down next to him and slingshots Sweetcheck through a basketball hoop, that kind of thing. But there's what I like, and this is the thing I talked about with Jones in the first one, or with all of the characters, but really Jones in the first one, is that there's never any real negative jokes thrown his way about his weight, and he doesn't seem to be disturbed about his weight. He seems very happy with who he is and very at peace with it. He's cool, and he's dancing, and he's having a good time. And we'll revisit this when we finish up the series, but it bears repeating. I think that is one of the massive elements of appeal of these films, is not just that these characters are oddballs and weirdos, it's that they are all completely at peace with it. They don't see themselves as weird or outsiders or in any way abnormal. They are happy with who they are, and they own it, and he does. That's something that's really really cool about that character. Also involved in the Citizens on Patrol program are a couple of skateboard punks who have been skateboarding throughout Harris's precinct, and who finally get arrested, and instead of going to jail, Mahoney convinces the judge to send them to the Citizens on Patrol program, kind of as a rehab thing. This is culminating. There's a lot of interesting tidbits about this. This involves a 80s skateboarding montage, which is one of the most 80s things you will ever see. But the kicker is that one of these skateboarders, not one of the main ones, just one of the kind of background skateboarders doing tricks with it, Tony Hawk. Frickin' Tony Hawk is in a Police Academy movie. That blew my flippin' mind. So yeah, but our two main skateboarders are Arnie, played by Brian Backer, who, again, kind of a staple of 80s films, and the other one, Kyle, is played by a young David Spade. Yes. Yeah, he's playing basically the same character David Spade always plays, just now as a teenager. It's what's funny about this movie is that several of its minor cast members actually went on to become fairly well-known and successful stars. For instance, let's talk about Mahoney's new love interest for this film. She is a reporter. The character's name, Claire Matson, who is there reporting on the Citizens on Patrol program. It's important to note, she's not a member of the program. She's not in this. She's just there reporting on it, yet she always seems to be with them. She's doing a ride-along with Mahoney at the end. You know, she goes with him on to arrest people in an airplane. Long story, we'll get there. And yeah, she's the basic, thankless, bland Mahoney love interest, played by Sharon Stone. Yes, a few years before she would become famous or infamous, depending on your definition, for flashing her privates to the entire movie-going public, she was Mahoney's love interest in Police Academy 4. But here's the thing, I think this is a good segue to talk about this, because one of the constants in my reviews of these films is that I don't like Mahoney. I don't like the character of Mahoney. I think I've made that very clear. But I have to say that in this one, I feel like Mahoney has finally grown up. He feels like he has finally reached a point of maturity that was lacking in all of his other appearances. Now, he's still a scamp, and he still plays tricks on Harris, and he still plays tricks on Proctor. Pretty mean-spirited ones, too, if we're being honest. But a lot of the other negative aspects of his character, that 80s sleazeball, have kind of dissipated, and he feels more like a normal Steve Guttenberg character. And again, so this is kind of interesting that the Sharon Stone love interest feels like the best one for him. First of all, there is no sexual harassment or inappropriate behavior in their relationships. This time, when he feeds her a line, it sounds just like that, a line, a guy trying to be charming and not trying to be creepy. There's also no weird power dynamic where he's in a position of authority and hitting on someone who is his subordinate, or in some ways his student, like we saw in the last film. She is an equal. She is kind of like him in that she seems to enjoy pranks and getting back at bullies. She fully goes along with him in his practical joke to super glue a megaphone to Harris's mouth. She helps provide the distraction for him to do it. So you get the feeling like this character actually fits Mahoney better, and that Mahoney himself has finally grown up, and he is not an insufferable character in this one. This is probably the best Mahoney's ever been in the series. So yeah, and I think we've seen that, we've talked about that with a lot of these characters throughout these films, is how they've grown from the immature cadets that they started out as to the officers they now are. Another example, in this film, we hear Jones actually use his real voice for longer than I think we've ever heard him. You know, I'm having a hard time remembering how often he actually spoke with his real voice without doing some kind of sound effect or, you know, doing some impression. But he actually talks like a person in this one for a while, giving instructions. So it's neat to see these characters kind of mature. It doesn't mean they're not fun. It doesn't mean they don't have funny moments or don't do the things that we've come to love. It just means that they have grown. I also feel the star of this one, the unsung hero of this one, is Bobcat Goldthwait, who he's been in 3 of these. This is the funniest he's ever been. And I think they finally figured out how to use Zed appropriately. And it's more fun to kind of put him in bizarre situations where someone with his voice and his kind of mannerisms wouldn't necessarily fit. There's a absolutely hysterical bit right at the beginning of the film when, to hype up the program, he goes to like a ladies' poetry session.
Thank you very much. Whew, I'm sorry, I'm an emotional, sensitive guy, and that part about the sheepbook just told my heart right now. I have my own poem that I prepared for you today. Gene made a machine. And Joe made it go. I blew a fart and blew the whole damn thing apart. I didn't write it.
They also include, they also continue an interesting Police Academy tradition, which we first saw in 2, of giving one of the more oddball characters a more flushed out love interest and romance than we see from our supposed main character, Mahoney. Yes, this time, believe it or not, Bobcat Goldthwait gets a love interest. He is the romantic lead of this film, as he strikes up a relationship with a COP volunteer, Laura, played by Corny Borer. And they are so cute together. It is so, I don't know, there's something so touching and sweet about this very lovely young lady who finds Zed, Bobcat Goldthwait, with his interesting looks and bizarre voice and kind of crazy mannerisms, but finds him attractive, legitimately. And we, kind of like with Tackleberry and Kirkland in 2, we see how these two characters actually really fit together. You would think that they wouldn't, but they do. And it's every time they're on screen together and they're sharing moments, it is incredibly touching and very, very sweet. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the Bobcat Goldthwait romance, which is an interesting sentence to say. Not all characters get equal screen time in this one. That's part of the problem when you're dealing with a large ensemble cast, is that eventually some characters are going to get the short end of the stick and aren't going to do much. Hooks kind of gets it this time. We don't really get a bit with Hooks. I can't recall. I don't think she does her typical, shouting bit. We don't really see her teaching a class. Oh, I am wrong. I am so wrong. I just recalled there is a point where she slips Harris some helium so his voice sounds like her. So I am 100% wrong on that. So she does get a moment. So sorry about that, Marion Ramsey. I'm sorry that I forgot about that. God rest her soul. So yeah, she does get something to do. I'm sorry. Interesting though, Hightower doesn't get anything to do in the heavy action scene at the end, which is bizarre because that's usually where Hightower excels. In all other films, he usually has one of the more interesting moments, or he's usually the centerpiece of it because of his size and strength. But yeah, this time during the extended action scene towards the end, Hightower does not really participate, which I found very bizarre. Another interesting thing about this climactic scene. So the scene is a jailbreak with all these different gangs, even a gang of ninjas. That's how 80s this thing is. There's a gang of ninjas. And one of the villains, one of the criminals who's in jail, a Texas guy, is playing Simon Says and is able to get Proctor's gun away from him. So it seems like he's set up to be the main bad guy that they're going to be chasing. But when they do the climactic chase scene, you don't ever see him. He never, so that was just really weird. It's like, why isn't he one of the last guys that they're chasing? I don't know who the last guys they're chasing are. They were just 3 random criminals who end up at an air show and steal a plane in a hot air balloon. It's a very interesting and odd action sequence. But yeah, I also say that the comedy in this one hits a little bit better. It's not to say that all of it works. There is an extended bit in the middle of this one where David Spade, Brian Blecker, and House are all kind of boasting that they're ready to be cops and this isn't so hard. So Mahoney, Tackleberry, Hightower, and Jones basically set up this whole thing to haze them and, play this big extended prank on them where they take them out in the middle of the night and make them think that they're catching a serial killer, and it's just Hightower in a weird costume. Yeah, I'm sorry. That whole extended bit is not funny. It just does. It's a long bit where we, the audience, already know the outcome, and it doesn't really land, in my opinion. It kind of hits a thud. So, and it goes on for so bloody long, so freaking long. Like, they could have cut that a lot, or they could have given some screen time over to other things and let that take up that amount of time. But yeah, so that didn't really. It also just, with the Police Academy movies and all these kind of high concept comedies, with all things, there's a suspension of disbelief you have to go through. There's a bit you have to, you're watching a Bugs Bunny cartoon, you have to go, okay, clearly Elmer Fudd does not recognize that is a rabbit in drag that is seducing him. That's just one of the bargains you make when you watch a film like this. But the fact that these 3 guys, that these 2 skateboarders and heavy gentlemen, cannot tell that that's Hightower in that disguise. That, I think, is crossing the line to abject stupidity. You have to assume that people, when Jones is doing his sound effects, that people can't tell where the voice is coming from. That you're like, okay, that's just part of the joke. You have to accept it. But the fact that these guys could not recognize Hightower, it's like, come on. He's a pretty distinct looking fella. There's not a lot to get confused about with Hightower. So in that whole bit does not work. But that is the vast minority of the film. For the most part, I think the humor is fairly tight and some of the best the series has produced. However, that does mean we now have to enter our favorite segment, How Offended Should I Be?
Wicked.
So, how offended should I be? The answer is not much, really. Refreshingly, this installment is probably the least problematic we've had so far. There's nothing really I can point to as any kind of cringe moment or, you know, anything that just stands out as completely offensive or anything like that. It's much tamer than its predecessors. We have things like we have the traditional visit to the Blue Oyster, which is always kind of a funny callback, and it's I don't know, after a certain point, like, it's just nice to go back to the Blue Oyster. It's something you're expecting in every film, but kind of like I was talking about with that willing suspension of disbelief, when you get this deep into a series, it becomes harder and harder to contrive reasons for characters to go to a place and be surprised by it. So yeah, like this time, Harris and Proctor are sent there because they're looking for a restaurant, and Mahoney tells them that this place has the best salad bar in town. So first of all, if you're Harris, why are you going anywhere Mahoney tells you to go? Like, that just reeks of issues. Like, at some point, the blame is on you on this one. If I'm Harris and Proctor says, well, Mahoney said this place is great, be like, Mahoney said? Okay, turn around, we're leaving. I don't know what's on the other side of those doors, but it's not going to be something I enjoy. More damning is, so in number 2, Proctor knew the address of the Blue Oyster by heart. In part 3, he actually went to the Blue Oyster. So why does he not know what the Blue Oyster is right off the bat? They walk in, they see the sign, and he's just like, oh, it must be a seafood bar. It's like, dude, again, I know we're supposed to have willing suspension of disbelief. I know we're supposed to know Proctor is not the sharpest knife in the shed. But it just, at a certain point, you're just like, this is on you guys. But yeah, I don't even find the visit to the Blue Oyster problematic in this one, because I get the feeling like when they force Proctor and Harris to dance, it's more because they're being jackasses and they want to make them uncomfortable. So, you know, it doesn't ring as, you know, kind of uncomfortable as maybe it did in previous films. This is also an interesting moment where we get another hint that Proctor might be gay, when, like, one of the bikers grabs him and they start to dance. He looks at him and with a genuine smile and says, like, nice collar. It's like, okay, like, nothing wrong with that. I know that you couldn't really come out, you know, literally, with something like that, with a character like that back then. So maybe there were just some little nods or something that were added, but yeah, so even the visit to the Blue Oyster isn't really problematic or anything like that. There are a few moments, like when Lassard is at the International Commissioners Convention or whatever he's at there, with some of the foreign delegates, you know, using very, you know, stereotypical accents. But again, it's very quick. It's not done. I feel like it's done more as a shorthand than it's done as a poking fun at, if that makes sense. The only other things I can kind of think of is, you know, some people might have a problem, like I said, with the jokes, the physical comedy about House's size. But as already stated, he doesn't seem to have a problem with it, and nobody calls him anything or gives him any kind of grief about it. It's kind of just seen as that's just who he is, and that's, you know, that's fine. So yeah, it definitely feels like Police Academy has kind of mellowed in its middle age, and I think there is a very specific reason for that. So as I mentioned, this movie came out in 1987. In 1988, the next year, the Police Academy cartoon was going to premiere, which means that it had to have already been in early stages of production, or maybe it was already in production given how long it could take a cartoon show to get made back then, even one that was made on the cheap. It had to have already been in the planning stages and already have a slot. They were probably already planning the action figures. So, again, I have no proof of this. But what that says to me is that the people behind Police Academy, the studio behind it, the creative forces behind it, must have recognized where their true audience really was, and that the biggest fans of this property and the ones that were going to keep it going were not adults or maybe college-age kids like I think the first one was marketed to. It was gonna be kids like myself at the time, and like a lot of other people, really fell in love with these films, which must have come as a little bit of a shock to the creative forces behind it, especially when you consider just how not for kids the original was. It's kind of like Ghostbusters. Now, it's very difficult for people nowadays to understand this, but the original Ghostbusters was not made for kids. It was not a kids movie in any way, shape, or form. It was definitely aimed at an adult audience, not just in the sexual overtones and things of that nature, but just the content of it. About starting a business, dealing with bureaucrats, things like that. These were all things that were aimed at the adults in the audience, and I don't think they ever expected it to resonate with kids the way it did, but it did. If you want a further deep dive into that, go check out Movie Bob's essay on Really That Good, where he talks about Ghostbusters and why it kind of connected with a younger audience in the way that it did. And Police Academy, I think, very much falls into that category, that it was aimed at an older audience, and we've covered a lot of this in previous reviews, but let's just hit the high points. But again, the plots are very thin. They're not difficult to follow. The characters are a Commedia dell'arte troupe. They are easy to identify. You know what each of them brings to the table, what their special abilities are, what their personality traits are, right from the jump. That's another reason, as we've already said, why this film, I think, was able to spawn as many sequels as it did, because you didn't need to see the previous films to understand who these characters were and what their role in the film was. And because they are very much a Commedia troupe and the characters are very big and very over the top, well, that just sounds like a cartoon, doesn't it? So yeah, of course kids fell in love with this, and of course kids were drawn to it. It also had a lot of adventure and action. All the films have an extended action scene towards the end, and that's something that kids of the 80s just loved. So yeah, it was very easy for young people to glom onto these movies like I did and like a lot of other people of my generation that I've talked to about these films say they did. You notice a lot of folks said, I loved this movie as a kid. You very rarely hear somebody go, oh yeah, I love this movie when I saw it in my 20s. You know? So I feel, and again, just making an educated guess here, that the producers of this film series realized what they had and kind of decided to ease back on some of the raunchier or more adult-focused humor. Now, it's not that it's not in there. You know, like I said, we go to the Blue Oyster. There's also a bit where kind of her typical joke for the film, almost called it the episode, which would not be inappropriate, I think, but where Callahan is teaching a water rescue class, and she jumps into the pool in her white t-shirt. She comes up, and of course, you can see right through it to her, you know, impressive female form, let's just say, and all the guys jump in after her. Yeah, that's something that is there for the adults in the class. But a lot of times those things kind of sail over the heads of the kid. You know, if you don't know the joke behind the Blue Oyster, you know, you're not getting really what's going on. You get kind of the general gist of why it's funny, but you're not really getting all of it. With Callahan, like, I think at that age, at the age of the kids that are kind of liking these movies, you're starting to notice girls. And there's a difference, I think, between a wet t-shirt and full-on nudity like they had in the original. So they still have their kind of adult-themed jokes in there, but they are much mellower, and the word subtle doesn't seem to fit. But they are much more subtle in their presentation. So, yeah, of all the ones we've watched so far, and I can't really recall where they go from here, we'll find out, but this one definitely feels like the least problematic so far.
Red.
We've established this is probably the best the ensemble cast has ever been. A lot of the characters have grown past some of their more irritating or problematic issues. The film itself does not feel like it's plagued by a lot of the same missteps and miscalculations of its predecessors. Feels like everything is finally firing on all cylinders, and this is kind of the pinnacle of what would be considered to me the classic Police Academy formula. But as we have already stated at the beginning, nothing gold can stay, and this is kind of the first and last moment of the perfect standard Police Academy film. As we already stated, again, this is the dead center of the Police Academy movies. Out of 7 films, this is number 4. And so, with it kind of achieving these highs, this is also a moment of transition. Now, we have already seen throughout the course of the 4 films we've gone through a lot of turnover in the cast. We see a lot of one-and-dones, you know, characters who are there for one movie and then just they don't come back, or maybe they come back for one but not another. But so we're not so losing cast members is not something that is foreign to this film series at this stage. But what is that this is the last film for a lot of the mainstays, a lot of the cast who have been there since the beginning, or close to it, and have gone with us throughout the majority of these films, if not all of them up to this point, whom the audience has formed a bond with, the audience is familiar with, and that have filled out very specific places in the canon. This is kind of the first, and I think the last time, that we're going to see this big of an exodus of recognizable characters. As the films kind of peter out, we'll see a few more people kind of come in and then fade out as they try out new formulas. We'll introduce some new characters, and we'll see a few others fall away, especially as we kind of limp towards the final installment. But this is the first time there has been this big of an exodus of named important mainstay characters, and it's understandable. The films at this point have been going for 4 years. 4 years solid. Each year has brought a new film, so it's understandable that some of these actors are probably getting a little tired of doing the same thing and wondering just, where is this going to go? When is this going to end? And for some of these actors, their careers are starting to expand. I'm not trying to be mean-spirited here, so please take this in the vein in which it is intended. But a lot of these actors in these movies, while they had amazing careers and were truly remarkable people, as we've discussed and will continue to discuss, for a lot of them, this was kind of the highlight of their career. These roles are the roles that they are most identified with. And while a lot of them would have, great careers as character actors or guest spots here and there, this is kind of their bread and butter. Again, not meaning any disrespect to the talent, but Michael Winslow is not really waiting for a multi-picture deal for some solo films. That's just not going to happen. I remember seeing a behind-the-scenes thing of Jaws 4. This is kind of off topic a little bit. And they asked the woman who plays the lead in that, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, and I'm going to be very disappointed in myself when I remember it after I'm done recording this. But they asked her, why would you come back for this movie? You had to know it was crap. You had to know it was terrible. And she said, yeah, I knew all of that. But what I also knew is I had been an actor for 30, 40 years, and I had never starred in a film before. I'd always been a cast member or a part of the ensemble or a character part. I had never starred in a movie, and I wanted to say that I did that. So I respect that, and I think that can be the reason why a lot of these actors stuck with this franchise as long as they did. Even if they had lucrative careers as character actors, this is, again, what they are known for. This is their film series. Others were branching out and starting to take off in other areas. For instance, these films, despite how he kind of paints them and how he's not real thrilled with them in retrospect, but Bobcat Goldthwait owes his career to these films. These were the things that kind of launched him into the mainstream and kind of made him a recognizable character to a wide audience. So you can understand why he wanted to kind of step away after this one. But he's not the only one. Who all is leaving us? Well, this is the final outing for Nagata. So Brian Tochi, who we talked about last time, even though he's only been in 2 of these, this is his last appearance. He does come in for a brief cameo and a fight scene and another little romantic scene with Callahan, which I was happy about. I'm glad that they got that little nod in there. Even though he only had a very small role, this is also the last one of these for Copeland. For Scott Thompson, who has been with them in all but the second one up to this point. So this is his last outing as far as I am aware. If he shows up in one of these other ones and I didn't realize it, I'm going to feel stupid for saying that. So let's put an asterisk there just in case. Also leaving us, Tim Kaczynski as Sweet Chuck. So Sweet Chuck is no longer going to be around. I want to take a quick detour here and just talk a little bit about Tim Kaczynski. I'm sorry I mispronounced his name a bit, because he's another one that has kind of an interesting story as to how he got to Police Academy. So he started out as a as an advertising executive. He worked in the advertising department for Leo Burnett Worldwide, and in an attempt to gain confidence for sales pitches, he took an improv class at the Second City. And for those who don't know, the Second City Improv Troupe is like the premier improv troupe. Their alumni are like a who's who of comedy. And so not just like the best improv troupe in Chicago, but they're probably the best improv troupe anywhere. And he took this class, and he was so good that he caught the eye of John Belushi, who got him a job as a writer on Saturday Night Live, and thus began this career as a pretty well-known comedy writer. He wrote and did guest spots on a ton of well-known shows. Curb Your Enthusiasm, Still Standing, According to Jim, What About Joan? He's won a ton of awards. He's won awards and been nominated for awards from the Writers Guild of America. He's received a BAFTA. I mean, the guy has a phenomenal resume, and I can kind of understand, and I don't know for a lot of these people if the choice to leave was theirs, or if the next script was in development and just didn't know what to do with them, or what. But I can understand kind of wanting to leave after 3 movies and pursue your other writing projects. So that's probably what happened there. But yeah, so Tim Kaczynski is leaving us. But probably most notably of all this is the last Police Academy movie for Steve Guttenberg as Mahoney. I know that I have been very harsh on Mahoney, the character of Mahoney, throughout these early reviews, and I don't think unjustifiably. I stand by the critiques that I have given, but you also can't ignore the fact that these movies, again, launched Steve Guttenberg's career, and Steve Guttenberg is one of those guys who is synonymous with the 80s. He is an 80s mainstay, and we're going to see some other films that he's been in over the course of this series. So you can't deny just how much of an impact this series had on him, on his career, and again, on the 80s kind of in general, as he was such an integral part of the pop culture of the time. So I may not have enjoyed Mahoney for the majority of these films, but I do recognize the talent of Steve Guttenberg and that he had a lot to offer. I don't know if he was necessarily integral to the success of these movies, but I do believe that he contributed. His presence helped bring them legitimacy, especially as his star kind of began to rise. The fact that he would come back for more of these kind of gave them a little bit more of a nudge, especially when you consider some of the comedies they were up against at this time. And I said it before, and I'll restate it, that I do believe that over the course of these films, whether by chance or design, the character of Mahoney did grow up. And he did get better, and he did change as the films went on. And I do believe that whether they knew it or not, and I don't know if they already knew he wasn't coming back for the 5th, if they even knew there was going to be a 5th, they may have thought this was the last one, I don't know. But I do believe they gave him probably the best send-off that they could. That's why I get the feeling they either knew that he wasn't coming back, or they might have thought this was going to be the last one, because the final shot of the movie is Mahoney with Sharon Stone in a police academy hot air balloon floating away while everybody waves at them, pouring a glass of champagne and having the fantastic final line of "Here's to the Academy." What a great moment. I'm not being sarcastic or facetious in any way. I think that is a great moment. It's a great way of saying thank you to him for what he brought to the series, and in a way for him to say thank you to the series for what it did for him. Again, whether that's what they intended or not is up for debate, but the way it reads to me is a loving send-off to an actor and a character that has been the backbone of this series since its inception. So yes, so Mahoney sails off into the sunset with the one love interest that they gave him that seemed to be his equal and that he seemed to be on better footing with. I don't think you could ask for a much better send-off than that. Wrap up another Police Academy film, and the question now that has to be answered again is, does it hold up? And I think we've answered that pretty well throughout this. Yes, it does hold up. I would say that, again, of the classic formula Police Academy movies, I think this is the high point. I think this is everybody firing on all cylinders. Everything feels comfortable and lived in. I think that you can still pick this one up, watch it today, like I did, and still enjoy it. So, whether it's the best of the series or not, we will hold off on that till the very end. But I do think that it is kind of right now the high water mark. And they have a tough act to follow now, because the series is getting long in the tooth. Anytime you get past 4 and you're moving, into the upper digits, you have to kind of make some decisions. And in our next installment, they are going to break some of their own rules, and they are going to try again to take us out of the comfort zone of the academy and try to get these guys on location, on the ground, and doing actual police work with more of a story and a narrative than they've ever really had before. They're also going to have to do this without their prime leading man. How is it going to hold up? How is it going to work? I could tell you originally, but I haven't seen this movie in years, so I am looking forward to answering that question just as much as you are. So I hope you'll join me next time when the remaining recruits of the police academy leave the metropolitan area, wherever the hell that is, and head for assignment Miami Beach. So thank you for joining me. Thanks for coming along. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.
Robostache, you are fully trained. We've uploaded Police Academy to your brain, the movies and the actual training.
They are funny, except for 5. Assignment Miami Beach.
That is correct.